This is a concept that I have covered before, actually many times. And you always update your resume, and I guess I'll do another video certainly dedicated to this very topic. And I just want people to understand certainly not only where I come from, but I'm pretty sure other people feel the same way. This day and age, everybody's talking about the whole diversity thing. They talk about representation. They talk about these terms, inclusivity. And these are terms that are often used to justify, let's say, bad entertainment and justify needless changes to characters that people have already seen, be it on screen or have seen in, let's say, a comic book or so another visual medium, or that hell, sometimes they change freaking historical characters like the Anne Boleyn situation. Like they'll change those characters as well. This happens for a few different reasons, and we'll talk about it as a virtue, and I'm gonna just discuss that in a minute. But I think a lot of it simply has to do with the fact that a lot of them, like that, this is an internal problem, if you will, that was set by Hollywood themselves, and that is that they, and not just Hollywood, it's really happening in so many of these different industries where they have like rules that say you have to check this many boxes in order to, let's say, be eligible for an award or something of that nature. They got these quotas that they've placed ironically on themselves to say that they must meet this. So there's going to have to be changes, not just in what you see in terms of the content, but also behind the scenes and what you don't see. And when you're not bringing people in based on, let's say, merit, based on like trying to accurately portray something and give audiences what it is that they want, the actual content is always going to suffer. But this whole diversity as a virtue thing is always been hilarious to me because it's not. Diversity, as I've mentioned before, is a side effect. It's just a thing that exists, and it just happens to be a thing in the event that you are doing something where you have, let's say, in the case of be it racist or ethnic backgrounds, or rather in terms of sexuality or whatever, where you have people that are a thing, and yeah, that may be the outcome. And sometimes it's voluntarily arrived, but also it's also voluntarily arrived in some sense where something is not as diverse. Now, with this whole hyperemphasis of, let's say, diversity and representation and inclusivity, you have people that have placed themselves or attempted to place themselves on these moral high grounds, where they like to think that, hey, I'm doing it. We covered the Little Mermaid actor. Oh, I'm doing it. This is the black and brown kids because they have, unfortunately, they themselves see themselves as shallow, but they also think everybody else is as shallow as they are, where that's the only interesting thing about them, and often a thing that they could not control, like, let's say, being the race you are. White, black, doesn't matter. You just came out their way. Your parents just happened to be that, and that's the way that you came out. And it should be the least interesting thing about you, but for some people, they've made it, because they're boring, the most interesting thing about them, and they lead with it. So they like to think of themselves as self-importance, that they're influencing young people because, hey, we have the same skin tone, so that means you and I are the exact same, right? So if you see me doing awesome things, you can do great things, which is just utterly nonsense, considering that, well, people have more interesting things about them. Let's talk about their accomplishments. Let's talk about their interests and things of that nature, if you want to talk about relatability. But again, going back to the previous point, it's just a side effect of something that may happen, and you do see less. You see, whether it be more diverse or less diverse, it can be voluntarily arrived without a wrongdoing existing. The It's not even hyperemphasis, as I mentioned. It's more of an obsession with disparity is the term that I should use, where people see that something exists and they're like, it doesn't have a certain amount of this type of person, and therefore something is inherently wrong with it. And that just simply has never been the case and shouldn't be the case. Shouldn't always be defaulted to be the case. They run with that because they look at it like, well, you're actively putting people out, and they don't look at it in any sort of context. If you've seen me talk about this before in previous videos, I always use this analogy. Well, making it personable to me in terms of my accomplishments, track and field. Track and field is something that I obviously did all the way through the collegiate level. I know a little bit about it. I don't know, just happened to be a Division I, Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi record holder is still there. You can go look it up yourself in terms of the 100 meters, as well as the 55, though they don't run that as much anymore. With that being said, let's say if I started my own track facility and like this is a place that we coach, we train, we allow people to work out that are sprint, that emphasizes on sprints in terms of track athletes. So we're talking maybe 100 and 200 meter stuff. Maybe you can throw the 400 meter in there a little bit as well. But let's say that's what we emphasize. That's what we focus on. That's what this whole facility is built on in the training and bringing people in and all that. If, let's say, the majority of my coaches, they may be black. The majority of the athletes that come through there, they may be black. But that doesn't mean that there's some sort of wrongdoing there because, well, it just makes sense. Not just biologically, considering the fast twitch muscles is often found in people that are from that side of Africa or have lineage from that pocket of Africa. So whether it be Jamaicans, Americans, wherever they're from, you see all the 100 meter records. They're almost exclusively by black people with lineage, black lineage. This is just not my opinion. It's just a fact. Of course, you'll have a guy that creeps in there every now and then. Jeremy Warner was a great 200 meter and 400 meter runner, for example. There's a couple of guys that have been in college. You got a couple of guys, White Cats is running nines now. It happens. But for the most part, they're going to be black. So if the majority, let's say, of my again coaches or the athletes that are coming through are black, and that's less diverse objectively, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I use that as an example because it's such an obvious one when you're talking about things based on merit. And for whatever reason, though, you got these people who just assume that, well, something is either wrong or right because it's diverse or it lacks that. It's not a virtue. It's not something that is good. It's just, or bad. It is just a thing. And oftentimes it is, whether it exists or not, is voluntarily arrived. Now, that does not mean that there aren't people that, let's say, wish to do harm on folks that are of a certain ilk. That should go without saying. I shouldn't even have to bring that up. More so what it is that I'm trying to point out is that if you're going into definitely a creative project into it thinking that, well, it's diverse and therefore it's better, you're stupid. You're also wrong because it doesn't mean anything. Context certainly matters. And it just is. It's a side effect of what is. And depending on what, let's say, story you're telling, depending on what human affair that it is, as long as it's voluntarily arrived, that should be all that matter. That's it. As long as it's voluntarily arrived. If it's involuntarily arrived, meaning that you have some sort of act of aggression that exists in that given human affair, and that, let's say, the makeup is portrayed in that way, that's a completely different conversation. But that's not what's happening right now. You have folks that are hyper emphasizing and putting on a pedestal this concept of diversity when it's not a virtue at all. It's just a thing. It's just a thing. Now, there is one thing that I will say as it pertains to diversity that may be better than others, but it has nothing to do with your race or your gender or anything like that. It's more so in things that can be controlled, and that's in thought. That's in, let's say, experience. These are things that are, depending on that given human affair, may actually matter, right? Someone that if you are trying to build, let's say, a comic book, right? I don't know, maybe have some experience doing that, okay? Having different perspectives may be important to that, especially considering that there's different jobs. So myself as the writer and the guy that is coming up with these concepts, writing every panel, the artist, so it'd be the colorist or the penciler and inker. Okay, these are different jobs, and having their perspective is obviously going to be very important. Not to mention on the back end where you talk about creatively, editors, all that. Like having diversity in that sense makes sense, but that's not diversity as people use it. That's just talking about people's expertise. That's talking about people's thoughts. That's talking about people's creativity and as it pertains to diversity, not this superficial stuff, which is just things that we just couldn't control. We were born this way. Diversity is not a virtue, as I've said many times in this video. And if you are a person, business, whatever it is, and that's what you're emphasizing, you're almost just flat out telling your audience that this isn't the best that you could come up with. Instead, you are worried about checking superficial boxes in order to make something appear, or make you appear, maybe your company, maybe your creative project, whatever it is, appear to be virtuous as opposed to being good. That's all I'm saying. Wherever you're viewing the content, I appreciate you. If you enjoyed it, you may be interested in my comic book company, Rippaverse Comics. Our first book and campaign, ISOM #1, brought in $3.7 million with tens of thousands of satisfied customers. Visit Rippaverse.com to check out our store and stay up to date with the latest campaigns from one of the hottest new comic book companies. Also, my first big step towards a parallel economy was the development of my personal website, EricDJuly.com. This entirely replaced my Patreon. Now, if you enjoy this content, please consider becoming a member over at the website. We have an ever-expanding list of perks for various membership tiers, a forum, and a phone app. Some of these perks will even benefit you if you're fans of the Rippaverse. Anyway, I appreciate you so much for being a supporter and or customer. I even got a little love for my haters.